Welcome to Whitesnake Fest.
This is Metal Mike, and this episode is devoted to David Coverdale and Whitesnake. I brought in a special co-host, Steve Perkins from the Wildman and Steve Show, and together we revisit some key moments in Coverdale's career. We go head-to-head and we try to figure out the superior album, Whitesnake 1987 or Slip of the Tongue. We also bring in Whitesnake member Joel Hoekstra. We talk about his killer new album, Joel Hoekstra's 13 Running Games, and we get an insider's view from the Whitesnake camp. Check it out. Well, Steve, welcome back to the 80's Glam Metalcast, and this is going to be a special Whitesnake episode, so I know that makes you happy.
Dude, I could not be more happy.
So, just if people don't know, Steve's part of a podcast, the Wildman and Steve Show. Now, where's Wildman? Is he in timeout right now, or what's going on?
You know what? I had to send Wildman off to his room. He's got some homework to do.
Well, he's probably not as crazy about Whitesnake as we are, so.
You know, he loves all the 80s bands, secular, Christian, otherwise, but I don't think he's quite at the fever pitch of Whitesnake, at least the way I am, so.
Well, speaking of Whitesnake, so you're pretty hardcore into this band. How did this obsession start?
So it started for me in 1987 with the Columbia Record and Tape Club. I don't know if you remember that.
Oh, yes.
But you know, it was this tape club deal, right? You buy so many albums, like for a penny, right? And then you're in the club, and then you get these mailers every month with the new releases and so forth. And I never forget getting the Columbia Record and Tape Club mailer, and there was this album by this band called Whitesnake, and the description was that they sounded Zeppelin-esque. I'll never forget this. They sounded Zeppelin-esque, and I'm like, okay, hey, that's worth trying. I'll get that one. And at the same time, I'll never forget the same order I got U2's Joshua Tree. So here comes Whitesnake 87 and U2's Joshua Tree in the same mailing to me. I listened to the U2 and I'm like, okay, whatever. I put in the Whitesnake and fell in love. It was like, oh my gosh, this is the greatest thing I've ever heard in my life. And then I began to dig in, and of course in those days it was through the music magazines. You know, we didn't have the internet. And so learning through the music magazines, hey, these guys have actually been around for a while. And so come to find out there's all these other albums. And so I start digging back through and getting the whole back catalog. And from there, it's just off to the races.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that because most people, myself included, you know, I thought this was a new band, Whitesnake. I was not aware of their past, and I saw Whitesnake open up for Motley Crue, which was an awesome show, my first concert. But once again, it also created that illusion like this is a new band. It's an opening band. And then, you know, I'd be going to record stores, and all of a sudden I'd see all these different albums from Whitesnake, and some were from the early 80s and some were from the late 70s. So I started to learn that, you know, this is a classic band, and obviously you learn the history, you know, of Coverdale being in Deep Purple. So there's a lot of history there. But yeah, that, you know, I think for most of us in the States, it's the 87 album that got us. That's when we got bit by the snake, I think.
Oh, absolutely. And you're exactly right. You know, for me, I was born in 68. Okay, I'll go ahead and say this on the air. I was born in 1968. And so, you know, growing up in the 70s, but still really a little kid, I didn't know any of this stuff at all, really. And so it was Whitesnake 87 that really opened me up to then the other bands. Once I started digging back through that, exactly like you said, I discovered Deep Purple, who to this day is one of my all-time favorite bands. And then ultimately that took me back to the blues. Actually, American blues from the 20s and 30s. But I came to all of that stuff because of that Whitesnake album. And so, yeah, I backtracked through the decades then, but came to love all of it.
So, obviously, like we said, they did a lot of albums in the late 70s, early 80s. But for time's sake, you know, we could have a 4-hour podcast. We'll do a part 2 maybe down the road. But we'll start in 1984 with Slide It In. And I think at this point, this is kind of the groundwork that would get us to the 1987 album, because a lot of work's being done to try to break this band in the U.S. John Sykes is brought in. MTV's playing videos by these guys. So this is kind of the beginning of what would be a real huge takeover for this band. What are your thoughts on that, Steve?
Oh, yeah, it's a great album. I think it's the first of the Geffen albums. They changed record companies at that point. You're right, you've got the early videos. In fact, there's an early video compilation called Foreplay. Of course, David Coverdale loves his play on words. It's 4 videos, and so you've got Love Ain't No Stranger on there. You've got Guilty of Love, and a couple other songs from that Slide It In album. That to me is, you're right, it's the start of it. To me, it's still hard rock. It hasn't moved into the glam metal that the '87 album and then the Slip of the Tongue would be. So it's still that hard rock. You've got quite a bit of bluesy sound in there. But just absolutely incredible, quite a punch in the face. Love that album.
Yeah, and there's a lot of great songs on it. Obviously, like Love Ain't No Stranger and Slow and Easy were minor hits in the U.S., and they pretty much sounded in line with what was going on, with the 80s hard rock and heavy metal. But then there's other songs like Gambler and Give Me More Time. They actually sound like they could work in the 70s. Like, they sound like 70s hard rock to an extent. So I think this is like the transition album, right? So some of the old blues 70s rock is still there, but then we've got some 80s sensibility. So we've got a little mix of both sides of Whitesnake at this point.
Yeah, absolutely.
It sounds like by the time we get to 1987, the plan by John Kalodner at Geffen, he also had a plan for Aerosmith, which worked very successfully with Permanent Vacation. But the plan is to get Whitesnake full on, big in the 80s. And what happens with this whole project, as people know, is that Coverdale got really sick. He got a severe sinus infection that pretty much derailed him for quite a while. And he wasn't able to sing or do anything like that. And it almost looked like the whole thing was falling apart. The whole band was gone. And he kind of was starting over. And basically what was created was an 80s metal supergroup with guys like Adrian Vandenberg, Vivian Campbell, Rudy Sarzo, Tommy Aldridge. I mean, this was just like, once this got onto video and came out, I mean, this is like hair metal overload. What do you think?
Oh, it was incredible. It was the sound and it was the look. I mean, it was MTV made for Whitesnake, or was Whitesnake made for MTV? You tell me. It was that perfect time. And, these guys, look, David Coverdale is the front man's front man. Okay, this guy knows how to put on a show. And so when you've got MTV suddenly bringing the visual in a way that we've never really had it before, you're not going to see your band unless you go to a concert, prior to MTV. And so suddenly you've got that visual. You got Coverdale, who's this incredible front man, great presence, but then all the guys, right, they got the great teased down hair, Aquanet by the case, and so you got that going on. But like you said, the musicianship, all those guys, everyone that you named, has such a solid, resume coming into that album and that band. It just is the perfect storm.
Yeah, really. I mean, I think, when we think of the 87, from probably 87 to 89 is the pinnacle of hair metal. So, they're hitting it right at the right time. MTV's loving this. They're loving the way the videos look. They're playing them constantly. It was right. I think you nailed it. It was the perfect storm for these guys. But do you think that this album alienated fans of their old sound?
Oh, I know it did. Mm-hmm. Oh, I know it did. In fact, you go on the fan sites today, and it's funny, especially if you go on Facebook, there's so many Deep Purple fan sites, but the one main Deep Purple fan site where people talk about all of the spin-offs of Deep Purple, Rainbow and Dio and Whitesnake and all this kind of stuff, and everybody loves to talk about that stuff. Boy, there is a division in those fans between the first Whitesnake of 78 up through maybe right up through and possibly including even Slide It In, and then there's the 87 album and everything afterward, right? Mm-hmm. There's this huge divide, and a lot of people love the one and hate the other. You also have people who love it all. I'm certainly in that latter category. I love it all. They're wildly different. Yes, they're different, and I love both of them. But there's a huge difference there, and people who really wanted that blues rock, they kind of felt betrayed. They felt it was just, pretty boys, playing to MTV, and going the more screaming route with the vocals and that sort of thing. But I don't know, it worked for me.
And let's face it, there's only one way a band is going to survive through multiple decades, and that's to change. You saw it with Kiss. Kiss had a certain sound in the 70s, which was a more hard rock sound. They took their makeup off, and they did a more of a metallic sound in the 80s. So, Aerosmith, same thing. You can't put Permanent Vacation next to some of their 70s albums. So I think this is how you survive. And look at the Rolling Stones would be an even better example. These guys, they know what to do in each decade. They have to update their sound. So, I don't think Whitesnake did anything out of character with any other band that was from the 60s or 70s.
No, they absolutely didn't. And, we've talked about this, you and I and Wildman, when we talked about Stripe. Here's the thing. You may not like what they do. Well, that's fine. Everybody's entitled to their own opinion. But these guys are musicians. They're artists. They want to create. They don't want to just do the same old thing. Now, they could do that, right, if that's what the record company would love them to do, the same old thing over and over and over again. The record company likes you to take your first platinum album and just make that same album 10 more times. But if these guys are real musicians, they're going to break out. They're going to experiment. They're going to do different things. And I think as a real music fan, you've got to respect that. Again, you may not like it, and that's certainly each individual's preference. But I think you got to respect these individuals as artists who say, hey, you know what, we want to try something a little bit different on this album.
Now, one thing about this album, there's 2 songs that are re-recorded that were on the Saints and Sinners album, and that's Crying in the Rain and Here I Go Again. And it sounded like it was the urging of David Geffen that said, you guys got to revisit Here I Go Again. And when you think about it, I think that... I know. That song's the game changer for this album. Don't you think so?
Oh, there's no question about it. Now, it's not my favorite track on the album, although I fell in love deeply, okay? And I fell in love with the whole album. I love every single track. It's not my favorite. But it was I would say it was the runaway hit. I think Still of the Night is the much more powerful anthem. Of course, it's the one they've closed out every, concert since then with that one. But Here I Go Again was the big radio song. And, you go in your local Pizza Hut, right? And somebody's spinning that one on the jukebox. It was clearly the big breakaway for them.
Yeah, and once again, you're always looking for that crossover. That was a crossover that, it was being played on pop stations. It's getting played on rock stations. So, yeah, good call putting that on there because I think that's pretty much what drove that album into the stratosphere of platinum selling albums.
No question.
When you get to Slip of the Tongue, so this is where it's a hard album to follow up the self-titled album, right? So, I think this is something that a lot of bands face. You get this mega hit album, how do we follow it up? And with Slip of the Tongue, we've got Vivian Campbell's out of the band, and they bring in Steve Vai, and by some kind of twist of fate, Adrian Vandenberg hurts his wrist, and Vai plays on the whole album. So what are your thoughts on Steve Vai? Is he the right fit for Whitesnake?
Okay, this is going to be a little dicey. I don't think so. Okay. Now, again, I like the album. I thoroughly enjoy it. You and I were talking the other day. Vai has pointed out this is the first album. Every single song was recorded with a 7-string guitar. He had this 7-string custom made for him, and that had never been done before. Vai is virtuoso. When I think about Steve Vai, to me, I put he and Yngwie Malmsteen occupy the same place in my brain. These really virtuoso kind of players, which I love. I love that. That wasn't really quite all Whitesnake to me. Even from the 87 album, to me, the 87 still was a little bit a little bit more grounded. It felt a little bit more just coming from the gut a little bit more. Some of this just went off into the stratosphere with Steve's playing. Again, thoroughly enjoyed it. It isn't quintessential Whitesnake for me.
Right. And I think I know where you're going, and I agree with you because I think, Whitesnake tends to be a little bit more bluesier and Steve Vai's not that much of a bluesy player. But for me, I'm going to say, and I'm going to go out on a limb, and I'm going to say that he kind of makes the album for me. I feel like he adds an element that is very unique. And I think when you go back to the music that he's done with David Lee Roth, it's the same kind of a thing. He's kind of quirky, and when he's on his solo realm, he kind of really goes in some strange directions, and that's not for everybody. But I think when you can kind of put him in a more of a straightforward band, like something like Roth or something like Whitesnake, I think it adds a really unique element, because when you, no matter what, and Steven, you'll probably agree, if you listen to that, it doesn't really sound like anything else. It's very unique. So maybe it didn't work for Whitesnake, or it's not the traditional, Whitesnake sound, but it's pretty damn unique.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think when you hear that album, here's the thing, if you really know your artist, you're going to recognize that that's Steve Vai. Mm-hmm. If you don't know your musician, you're still going to say, that's something different. I haven't heard that before.
Because Steve Vai's always been known for a lot of the sound effects. You've got like Kitten's got claws. I think he's doing cat sound effects. Wings of the Storm, he's doing, sounds of the wind and all this kind of stuff. And he does a lot of multi-guitars. I think it's tasteful, though. I think it works, and I really like that album. So now let's talk about the album, even beyond the guitar playing. One thing, and we're probably going to disagree here, but I actually like Slip of the Tongue better than the '87 album. I feel it feels more like a band, like a solid band at this point. And I think there's more dimensions to the songs. Especially, I think there's some heavier elements that you don't hear, on the '87 album. And then a song like Sailing Ships. That's an amazing song. And you don't have any kind of song like that on the '87 album.
Oh, I think it's a fair point. I think musically and lyrically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you look at Sailing Ships. I think you look at Judgment Day.
Oh, Judgment Day is amazing.
Some people might find that the mix of songs actually a little bit jarring. Okay, so, you've got some real, barroom sleazy songs, slowpoke music, deep and nasty.
Yeah.
Kitten's got claws. And then you've got these really deep, poetic pieces.
Yeah.
Actually, the last, not the last three, but Wings of the Storm, Judgment Day, and Sailing Ship. You're going, how is that on the same album with slowpoke music? Right? So, as a whole, that's a little bit odd, but certainly there's a depth there. I think they came back to that in their most recent album, Flesh and Blood. There's a couple tracks on there that have got some of that sort of almost, I don't want to say mystical exactly, but it's definitely there's an atmosphere to it. There's a real feel to the lyric and to the music that goes with it.
Now, when you talk about this album, I've read some mixed comments from different band members. I've read that Adrian Vandenberg thinks that Steve Vai did a great job with the guitars. Then I've seen other blurbs where he said it wasn't as bluesy as maybe it could have been, and if he was on it, it would have been a little bit different, or maybe more Whitesnake appropriate. I've read different things with Coverdale's comments too. Coverdale said, I don't know if this was, our best or the right album for us. But then I think with the reissues, he's kind of like, so many people over the years have said this is an amazing album, and you know what? They're right. So I think time changes your point of view. Obviously, if everybody's digging it and nobody's, shaming the album, there's got to be some value there,
Absolutely. And I think, you bring up a really good point there. For any of us who've been listening to this music over the years and now, into the decades, really, it is interesting to think about how we respond to the music over time. I've always said I fall in love quickly when it comes to music. I'll hear something once and go, oh, my goodness, that's the best thing I've ever heard. Mm-hmm. And then, 2-3 months down the line, I might be going, I was wrong about that.
Yeah.
I fell in love a little too quickly there. But then you come back a few years later also and say, well, how do I hear it now? And as I was talking with you before we started the show, I was re-listening to these albums just today, and Slip of the Tongue it is good. It's a solid album. I really, here we are in the 21st century now, and it's still an enjoyable album to listen to. And the other thing is, it doesn't sound, to me, it does not sound unduly dated.
No.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes, I agree.
There's some albums that go, oh my gosh, that was clearly in the mid-'60s. Right. Oh my gosh, it sounds like the 50s, I don't know that this really necessarily just sounds 80s. I think it's got a little timelessness to it.
And there's a couple of thoughts as you were talking that were coming to my head. I think that sound production was really peaking in the late 80s, early 90s. So you're hearing music that is at top-notch production at this point. You know what I mean? So, and I think and that's why it still sounds good, because you can go back and listen to albums from the 60s. They don't sound good. Let's just be honest. You know what I mean? It's the equipment and the level of the quality of the equipment at this point. But another thing I was thinking about that you mentioned is your point of view changes over time. It really does. I can think back to certain albums. Europe is a band that comes to mind. I always thought The Final Countdown was their amazing album. And then over time, I thought now that the album after that, Out of This World, is a better album. So your tastes change. And another example of this is my kids are big into the Beatles. There was, I think, an interview with Lennon in 1980 before he died, and they were asking him about almost every track that the Beatles ever did. And a lot of the songs John Lennon said he hated. I hate this song. Or this was one of Paul's granny songs, he would call it, and maybe old-fashioned. But I always tell my kids, that was his point of view in 1980. What if John Lennon would have lived? What would he be thinking of these same songs today? His opinion, I can guarantee, would have changed on a lot of them. Maybe not all of them, but I think time changes us. Experiences in our life changes us. So, yeah, like I said, maybe there was a time in the 90s where maybe Coverdale wasn't feeling the Slip of the Tongue album, but then you get to, 2021 and he feels differently.
Well, the best example of that is George Lucas and his own reaction to Star Wars.
Yeah, yep.
And how many times has Lucas gone back and edited or messed with, depending on your perspective, the original Star Wars movies.
One thing we've got to mention about this late 80s era of Whitesnake is, Tawny Katane was a big part of the videos, and my question to you is, who had better hair, her or Coverdale?
Coverdale.
There was a picture of them from, I seen it was like they were at a music awards thing together, and I was like, they almost have the same hairdo. They have giant curly hair, you know what I mean? But it was the 80s, man. Everything, it was normal. It was normal to have that big, long hair.
Oh, absolutely.
Speaking of hair, DDR Music Group is the premier glam, sleaze, and hair metal label. They've got a kick-ass roster consisting of tons of bands that you remember from the 80s Sunset Strip. Bands like Electric Angels, Blondes, Sweet Savage, Cats in Boots, Jailhouse, Jet Boy, and many more. Well, maybe you're just looking for something that you've never heard before, some rare or modern hair metal. Well, they've got that too. Go discover rare and hard-to-find glam, sleaze, and hair metal CDs at ddrmusicgroup.com. Hey guys, this podcast takes a lot of time and effort. I want to do more in-depth projects on here, but I can't do it without your help. Just Google 80's Glam Metalcast on Anchor. Once there, hit the support button and you can donate 99 cents, $4.99, or $9.99 a month. Your support will ensure that this podcast will be rocking out for years to come. Thanks for listening. Now here's Joel Hoekstra.
Joel, so glad you could join us for this special Whitesnake episode. How you doing tonight, man?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for taking the time out tonight.
Awesome. Yeah, no problem. Well, before we jump in the snake pit with you, why don't you tell everybody about your new kick-ass album, Running Games?
Yeah, thanks so much. Just came out, February 16, I think was the release date. Gosh, one day's becoming the next here. But yeah, it's melodic hard rock that I think is Dio-ish at its heaviest, Foreigner-ish at its lightest. I got a killer lineup with me. Russell Allen is singing on it. Vinny Appice on drums, Tony Franklin on bass, Derek Sherinian on keys, and my buddy Jeff Scott Soto actually sang the backing vocals on it too, which is kind of amazing. So a killer lineup of musicians, great. Just melodic hard rock, man. It's all about the songs, despite me being a guitar player. It's not so much about 3-minute guitar solos and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, you nailed it. The musicianship is killer. The songwriting's killer. And it's funny because, you mentioned, I read that, what you said about the Dio and the Foreigner contrast. But when I listen to it, I kind of get the vibe like I'm listening to a killer new band from the late 80s, early 90s that would kind of fit in the scheme of like Lynch Mob and Blue Murder. Am I on the right track with that? Or
Oh man, I think anything from that era with good musicianship is kind of in the end what I would appreciate people saying. I think that's awesome. I'd take either one of those comparisons because George and John are two fantastic players, and both those bands had great songs. So yeah, I think there's a couple Lynch Mob comparisons on this one. I think Heart Attack kind of came out with a little Lynch Mob flair to it somehow, and a couple of the riffs here and there, people have said, "Oh, that sounds kind of George Lynch." And the Blue Murder thing, maybe just because of Tony. Although, yeah. I mean, I did love the Blue Murder stuff, but I don't know that I necessarily hear it on this record.
Steve?
Yeah, listen. you had me at Dio and Foreigner, okay? I mean, anytime I see either of those names in a review, I'm going to read the rest of the review, and I'm going to want to listen to the album. And just as you said, man, you've got such a great lineup. I've got to ask the question, though. How do you do that? How do you guys just have each other all in speed dial or what? I mean, is there like, coolrockguys.com, and you guys could just go there and pull each other together for a section? I mean, how does that work?
Well, for me, it's the same lineup as the Dying to Live album, which I put out under this project name as well, Joel Hoekstra's 13, right? So everybody came back, and they wanted to do this second album, so that's a good sign. It means they had a pretty good time the first time around. The way it came together for Dying to Live was Tony Franklin and I had just finished doing a different project together called VHF. And I told him I had this idea of doing something that was my album, but having it sound like a band. And I said, we'll give it a project name or something. And he was into it. I really wanted to do all the writing and kind of be the guy who was in charge for a change and just be able to just kind of call the shots. I mean, I love being a part of all the bands I'm in, but every once in a while it's kind of good to be that guy. So, yeah, there you go. It started with Tony, and he recommended Vinny on drums, and right at that time Russell was joining TSO. And I thought, well, here's the perfect singer. This guy can sing Dio, he can sing Foreigner, he can sing Paul Rogers. I mean, this is like, this is the guy. And then Derek Sherinian on keyboards is an absolute, no-brainer as far as, like, who do you get? I mean, great sounds, killer parts. And on this particular album, I made a lot of room for it to play solos as well. So it gives me, like, somebody to duel with a little bit, It gives me a foil over there. So it's not just guitar solo. Here comes the guitar solo, Anyway, yeah, so great lineup of guys. And then as far as the material goes, man, just trying to approach it like a listener, like what do I want to hear? I want to hear good songs. Even guitar players, we get bored by the long guitar solos. So it's just all about the songs for me on this stuff, man. I just want to give people like good rock albums, man. That's it,
there's some albums out there that I feel that start off really strong and then they kind of fizzle out as you get to the end. But for me, this album, it keeps getting better as I go along. Like, I feel like I loved Hard to Say Goodbye, but then when I hit like Heart Attack and Fantasy and Lonely Days, it was just like killer, man. And I think Fantasy, that's probably my favorite song. I just think that's so catchy. I love the vibe to it. That one's got, a little bit of the Dio vibe in the verses, but the chorus is just catchy as hell. For me, man, like I said, I run the 80's Glam Metalcast, so this kind of music is just right up my alley.
Cool, thanks, man. I think, I needed to find the balance between stuff that was really melody-driven and also some stuff that was really riff-driven. If you write the stuff too melodic, it can kind of turn off some of the heavier fans that are looking for the blues-based rock that I'm a part of with Whitesnake, and vice versa. You get too heavy, and then the melodic rock fans are like, it's just not melodic enough. So trying to find the balance between the heavy and the hooky, I guess, right? And hopefully I did that with this one.
I think you just got your next album title, The Heavy and the Hooky.
Well, maybe. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how that plays out. That's definitely funny.
Well, we're all pretty close in age from what I can tell, and I'm interested to hear from you, Joel. Like, what are some of the bands that you were really into, like, that came out, like, in the late 80s?
So I started out very much into, like, the hard rock heavy metal, AC/DC, Black Sabbath, Ozzy, Iron Maiden, Scorpions, and then I would say, bands that were also really big with me as I got older that I was forget to mention, but, Dokken and Queensryche, those bands were big for me. But I definitely branched out into melodic, mellower bands like Journey, Boston, Foreigner. I definitely loved Rush and Yes, and I definitely loved all the guitar records that were coming out back then. I listened to all that stuff, the Yngwie and Satriani and Vai and Steve Morse, and I like classic rock stuff. The Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, Jimi Hendrix. It's kind of like you mash all that stuff together, and you get where my mindset is as far as rock goes.
And I think what's important, and you mentioned this with what you do with your music, but even like with stuff like Yngwie. I mean, Yngwie is a shredder, but he always had killer songs. When he had albums especially the one with Joe Lynn Turner, that's a song-driven album.
I think so too. I think he gets kind of a bad rap for like the songs on those albums. I see all the time people are like, there's no good songs. I'm like, what? Those albums still had good songs. I like a lot of the songs on the Trilogy record with Mark Bowles too. I thought that there was some good songs on there, and even the first couple, I thought, those songs really rock in their own way. I mean, he was the only cat coming forward with "I Am a Viking." You know what I mean? Like it was so Yngwie, but it was awesome. I mean, stuff rocked. I thought it was cool.
Let's bring it back to Whitesnake. So ultimately, you get into Whitesnake, and you're currently in Whitesnake. What's it like working with David and the guys?
Oh man, David's just great. Just great boss, great bandmate, great friend. Been really good to me the entire time. Just really, I have nothing but gratitude, man. As far as the whole situation goes at Whitesnake, we've been able to have the same lineup the whole time I've been in there. So it's great to work with these guys like David and Tommy, who have such an amazing history in rock and roll, and Reb too has quite an amazing history, and then you got guys like myself, Michael Devin and Michele that are just a little bit more like happy to be there and just making names for themselves, and so it's all good, man. We got a great mix of guys there, and David it starts at the top, man. David's a good dude.
Well, Whitesnake has so often been a two-guitar band, right? And I've got an interesting question for you here. If you think back to the other guitarists that have been in Whitesnake, and I'm going to throw some names out at you, who would you really like to have had a chance to play with? And I'm going all the way back. You had Mickey Moody, Ernie Marsden, right? You had Mel Galley, John Syke, Adrian Vandenberg, Vivian Campbell, Steve Vai, whom you just mentioned. Of those guys that have gone through the great and mighty Whitesnake, which one would you love to have played with?
Oh man, I can't really do that just because it's gonna disrespect any of the others. There's just such a great history in the band, all the players that have been through, and I think everybody brings something different to the table. So I mean, as much as you'd love to get one name out of me, I just can't really do it, I mean, I think everybody's got their own strengths in there, and every player that's been through there, but I'd be honored to work with any of them, quite honestly.
Well, let me follow that up then, and that, what, I really respect your answer on that, too, because, and let's be honest, I'm sure you've gotten questions like that before, and everybody wants to hear those kinds of things, but, being a professional musician who respects the work of other professionals, actually, that was really the best answer to that. Let me ask you this. What were some of the challenges in picking up some of the songs from maybe the back catalog of Whitesnake? Did you find anything particularly challenging, or you're going, oh, dude, I knew that riff anyhow, that's a no-brainer?
Well, I mean, there's always differences in terms of the live arrangements and things like that. I would say that's always the most challenging thing. You might be used to listening to a studio version of a song, but then the smart thing to do when you join a band is get with the most recent version of it. Like get a board tape or a live recording, right? So a lot of times it's just stuff like that, just learning the current live arrangement of the song, and you might not get as good of a recording in some cases. It might be a board tape, so you're trying to learn it off of there, and you're like, I can't hear the guitar, that kind of stuff, But I would say it's that. It's just learning the current arrangements, and that's always the smartest thing to do when you get the gig. Sorry, rambling on that answer, but that's my point. You get the gist of it.
Joel, is there a Whitesnake album that you gravitate to? Because Steve and I earlier just had a discussion where we love the 1987 album. He really likes that one. I really love Slip of the Tongue.
You know, I was your typical U.S. kid who like got exposed to the Geffen records, you know, as David calls them, Slide It In, and the 87 album, and oh my God, Slip of the Tongue. How tired am I? But I would say of those, and then of course, you know, when I joined the band, I got into the whole catalog and listened to everything and checked everything out. But you know, man, for my money, it's like, you know, that perfect thing of the late '80s and just in getting to know Whitesnake, and the one that I wore out the most is definitely the '87 record.
So Steve, you're right, man. It's the '87 album. If Joel says it, it's got to be.
I mean, I hate to choose favorites, you know, because it's like that's, you know, where people are like, oh man, he's not, you know. But I think you could safely say that one had something special, right?
Yeah. Oh, big time.
Yeah, it went quintuple platinum. So I mean, it must
exactly. It sold, you know, 9 trillion copies, so it must have been pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, we as we talked about it, it was kind of the perfect storm for the band. You know what I mean? It was the right time, it was the right look, the right videos, the right sounds. It's like the planets aligned for Whitesnake, you know, that year, and I mean, the rest is history.
Yeah, I think it was too. I think I just maybe the best blend of the. I guess of the 80s pop rock style that was happening with the still blues-based sound, right?
Yeah.
So finding that perfect marriage of those two sounds, I would agree with you. I just think there's something special about that record in particular. But no disrespect to the other ones, you know. I mean, because honestly, I like every Whitesnake record. So, you know, it just kind of for me, I think too. And part of it is probably I'm biased because that's the one I wore out as a kid, right? Mm-hmm. So I mean, those are always going to be the ones that stick with you. And like, you know, I remember being 16 years old and like playing that cassette every day. So
yeah, absolutely, I'm right there with you. And you know, for so many people, that's. In fact, we talked about this earlier, Mike and I, that, you know, that was the one that really broke Whitesnake open for so many people, especially here in the State. You know, Slide It In, a lot of people were aware of it, but once the 87 hit, people were like, oh my goodness, who is this Whitesnake? And so then people even discovered the back catalog because of that album.
Yeah, I would say so. I think that one, it just was huge in the U.S., and I think Slip of the Tongue really, in many of the ways, just kind of rode on the coattails, right? Because it was like the 87 record was so big, everybody was going to buy Slip of the Tongue, right? It was like, we can't wait to buy that one too. At least, I don't know, as a kid, that was the way. Who knows?
And isn't it funny how, like, when a band gets major success, if they have anything else out, it's like the record company was all ready to reissue all those albums. So, like, anytime I was in a music store, I'd see, you know, Saints and Sinners. Oh, what's this? And then you'd see you'd see all those, Come and Get It, and all those old Whitesnake albums. They just kept popping up, and they were selling. Those were all selling hot too, based off the 1987 album.
Yeah, that's the way it works, right? You hear the band, and then I got to check out these other albums from them, right?
Oh, definitely. Well, Joel, man, we really appreciate your insight and your time tonight. Anything you want to say to your fans out there in closing?
Just thanks so much, man. I mean, it's amazing to be able to get this far in my life, living my dream, and appreciate the support.
Awesome, Joel. Thanks so much, man. Have a great night.
Thanks so much, guys. Have a nice night.
Yep, take care.
Take care, man.
So when we hit the 90s, as we all know, grunge came in, and grunge definitely isn't in line with what Whitesnake was doing in 87 and 89. So the powers that be at Geffen think it's a great idea to take David Coverdale and mix him with his label mate Jimmy Page and do Coverdale-Page. What do you think of this pairing?
I couldn't wait for it to come out, and I still love it. I distinctly remember reading about it in the music magazines. Oh my gosh, Jimmy Page, David Coverdale doing this project. I remember going to the record stores. I was living in Kansas City, Missouri at the time with my wife, and I remember going to the record stores and saying, hey, you got the new Coverdale-Page thing coming out. And like, no, don't have a release date for that yet, you know. And kept checking back, and finally getting a release date. And I'll never forget picking that up. It's got that beautiful blue cover, and that yellow road sign with the two kind of lanes merging together, and I go, oh my gosh, this is great, right? Here comes Pagey from Zeppelin merging with David Coverdale and Whitesnake, Deep Purple. Like, oh my gosh, this is a match made in heaven. Couldn't wait to get it. Spun that sucker on CD and thought, oh, this is fantastic. Love it then, love it now. I understand there's a reworking coming out for 2023. Page and Coverdale talked about reissue, remastering some of the stuff, and then a couple extra tracks that didn't get on the album, maybe getting included with that. And if that happens, I'm certainly going to get it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was amazing because, I'll admit it, I like Zeppelin, but I'm not a huge Zeppelin fan. And I think sometimes what steers me away from Zeppelin is it's not as straightforward as I tend to like. And I think Jimmy Page is an incredible guitar player, and I love his riffs. And I think what Coverdale brings in is a little bit more of that pop sensibility, a little bit more catchiness to the songs. And I mean, I'm going to go out and say it's one of the best things either of them have ever done. I think I think when they work together, especially two talented people, they feed off each other, and their talent just exceeds itself. You know what I mean? And I just think that I was actually listening to it before we talked, and I just kept going song for song, and I was like, this is an amazing song. This is an amazing song. You know what I mean? Every song is good. There's no throwaways or anything on there. You could tell they really were passionate about what they were doing and took their time to make this album. So no, it's amazing. It really is.
Oh, and you made a good point there. Coverdale does bring that kind of pop sensibility. Certainly not, pop music like Debbie Gibson. So we're going to talk about 80s kind of pop, but you get a song like Shake My Tree, Pride and Joy. That kind of stuff. Feeling Hot. I mean, those are straight up Whitesnake kind of lyrics.
Yeah.
But then, interesting as I'm thinking about that, Whisper a Prayer for the Dying.
That's another one.
Is another one that goes, like on the Slip of the Tongue album, as we were saying earlier, one of those that's got a little bit of some more depth and some poetry really to the lyrics. And then, of course, you get Jimmy freaking Page, man. So you're not going to love that.
I always liked It's Over Now. I like when Coverdale sings in that low voice. It's a pretty cool tune.
Absolutely. Yeah, love it.
But with the tides of music changing so much, I know MTV played Pride and Joy. There was definitely some airplay, video play there, but I just don't think this really cracked through commercially because of the way things were. And unfortunately, probably the two of them, even though Jimmy Page, I would never say he was in a hair metal band, but I think it came across as hair metal somewhat. You know what I mean? By the look and just who both of them were, or dinosaur rock as they like to call it in the 90s. So I don't know if they could really push through that wall of grunge.
No. Grunge stopped it all. There's no question about that. It wasn't the right time. I think anybody who knows the album, I've seen this in numerous fan groups and reviews and so forth, it's well-respected album. People who know it really do enjoy it and really like it. But I think you're right. And I think, I don't think there was as much pushback from the Coverdale fans. I think they thought it was all really cool. I think there was some pushback from the Zeppelin fans.
Yeah.
And the fans of Jimmy Page. And people were going, oh, man, you're working with David cover version. And people always made the Page or the Plant and Coverdale comparison. And I got to be honest, sure, yeah, there's a physical resemblance between the two singers and some similarities in style of singing. But I don't think there's really as much as people like to make it out to be. And so I think it also got some pushback from the Zepp fans. And I don't know if it ever really stood a chance to really break big.
One interesting thing, and I don't know if people have checked this out, but please, after hearing this, check this out on YouTube. They started their tour in Japan, and they played Whitesnake songs, they played Zeppelin songs, and then they played songs from the album. This stuff sounds phenomenal. Like Coverdale, I don't know if that break from touring or whatever really did him good, but he sounds amazing. He's doing Black Dog, and let's face it, at a certain point, Robert Plant lost the high end of his voice. So there was no way, even at that time, that Plant could match probably the range that Coverdale had at that time. But that stuff sounds killer.
Oh, it's fantastic. I've watched it on YouTube as well. We're grateful for whatever footage we've got from that. It would be great if somebody had some decent footage of that could maybe be cleaned up and and even get a DVD. I don't think that's going to happen. Again, there weren't enough shows. My goodness, I would have loved to have seen that live. But from what I see in the videos, yeah, it was absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah, and I don't know what the real story is, but it sounds like somewhere at some point Robert Plant came calling and Jimmy Page went back with Plant, and which was very successful. But that tour never made it to the States. I think even though we were in the grunge era, I still think that tour would have been huge to have all the Whitesnake greatest hits and the Zeppelin hits and the Coverdale-Page songs. I think that would have been a big tour in the States.
Well, I think it would have. Right after that, I saw Page and Plant. They were doing a tour together. I think they did that album. Oh, what was it like? Walking into Clarksdale or something like that.
Yep.
And they did a tour together. And I saw them in Austin, Texas. We were living in Austin at the time. Saw them at the Frank Erwin Center, and the two of them, they actually played one or two songs from the Coverdale-Page album.
Yes. Yep.
And Plant on. So as I remember it, now again, that's been quite some time now. As I remember it, the crowd went wild.
Yeah. Yes. No, you're absolutely right. I know for a fact they played "Shake My Tree." You can find that on YouTube. So definitely at least played that song. So this would probably be a great time, Steve, for us to jump into the modern era. So what's great is that Coverdale and Whitesnake have been putting out tons of great albums since the 2000s and beyond. Good to Be Bad, Forevermore, Flesh and Blood. What do you think of the newer output?
Okay, totally excited about Good to Be Bad, totally excited about Forevermore when they came out. I definitely have some tracks on both of those that I really enjoy. To me, Flesh and Blood is one of their best albums ever. I kid you not. It is so good. It's just hard. It's in your face. It's fun. And then again, you get some of that subtle stuff. Heart of Stone, Sands of Time are songs that are just, again, a little bit deeper, a little bit more poetic. And then, like I said, you get the big fun ones like Well, I Never. I just love that one. Good to See You Again, Shut Up and Kiss Me, Hey You Make Me Rock. I mean, oh my gosh. If this album had been right in there with 87 and Slip of the Tongue, there's no question this sucker would have gone platinum.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's great that the guys are still doing it. I mean, I know that David's talked about, I've heard the word retirement come out of his mouth, but hopefully, they just keep going, doing what they're doing, and maybe they've got some more albums in them yet.
Yeah, it's funny, all our favorites, at some point they said retirement, and then they didn't mean it.
Oh, yeah.
They had the final tour, and then they come back and they tour again, or come out with another album. And you're right, Coverdale has said that. At this point, it definitely seems like he's gotten a second wind. He's had a lot of fun reissuing stuff. We've just recently had the rock album, the love album, and the blues album. So reworkings of the love songs, classic Whitesnake rock songs, and the more bluesy songs. So he's reissued that stuff. He's had a lot of fun with that. And let's not forget Whitesnake, the Purple album.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Where, in his own words, he says, you want to take the Deep Purple songs that he had done in 73, 74, and 76, and took some of the songs, and in his own words, let's snake them up a little bit. And that's exactly what they did. I thought the Purple album was stunning. And in fact, I put together a personal playlist that I called Deep White Purple Snake. And so I would take the Deep Purple original, follow it by the one from the Purple album by Whitesnake. So I would listen to the original and then listen to the new one. And boy, I got to tell you, I think they just knocked it out of the park with that album.
Yeah, I mean, I love the way they did Burn on there. I love Burn all the time. Burn all day long. That's a great song. So yeah, I love that one on there.
Oh yeah, I mean, come on, Burn is a classic. I mean, the first album that Coverdale did with Deep Purple, 1973, replacing the great Ian Gillan of Deep Purple, and it just comes in, and you got to realize, this is true for all of our really great rock heroes. You realize these guys were all in their 20s when they were making the music that we all loved for decades. So in 73, Coverdale was 22 years old. He's 22 when he wrote and recorded Burn. And that is a monster of a song. But then when they, of course, redo it and snake it up, I mean, it just blows the roof off.
Well, Steve, this was amazing. We got to talk about a lot of key moments in the Whitesnake history. We got to speak with Joel about his new album and about being a member of Whitesnake. I mean, you can't get any better than what we've accomplished here.
Dude, there's no better way for me to end my workday than talking with a brother in metal about one of my all-time favorite bands. Yeah, this was great.
All right, man. Well, you take care of yourself. Always a pleasure chatting with you.
Hey, good talking with you, Metal Mike.
Well, that was a great time with Joel and Steve. Go buy Joel Hoekstra's 13 running games. It is awesome. Go listen to Wildman and Steve on all podcast platforms as well. Go to Whitesnake.com and get all the updates on what's going on with Whitesnake. And if you need 80's Glam Metalcast to promote something for you, drop me a line at 80'sglammetal1@gmail.com. Consider being a supporter on Anchor. Become a subscriber on YouTube. And keep an eye out for weekly live streams on YouTube. Rock on!